Hello, this is Morale Bernard with the continuation of the story Affair at Styles. Last words were that tomorrow the daily papers all over England would blazon out the news and stare in headlines. Mysterious tragedy in Essex. Wealthy lady poisoned. And by the way, please subscribe to the channel, Study Coach UK, and please share the videos. Thank you very much. Let me proceed. There would be pictures of Styles, snapshots of the family leaving the inquest. The village photographer had not been idle. All the things that one had read 100 times, things that happened to other people, not to oneself. And now, in this house, a murder had been committed. In front of us were the detectives in charge of the case. The well-known glib phraseology passed rapidly through my mind in the interval before Poirot opened the proceedings. I think everyone was a little surprised that it should be he and not one of the official detectives who took the initiative. "Mesdames and messieurs," said Poirot, bowing as though he were a celebrity about to deliver a lecture. "I've asked you to come here all together for a certain object. That object it concerns Mr. Alfred Inglethorpe." Inglethorpe was sitting a little by himself. I think unconsciously. Everyone had drawn his chair slightly away from him, and he gave a faint start as Poirot pronounced his name. "Mr. Inglethorpe," said Poirot, addressing him directly, "a very dark shadow is resting on this house. The shadow of murder." Inglethorpe shook his head sadly. "My poor wife," he murmured. "Poor Emily. It is terrible." "I do not think, monsieur," said Poirot pointedly, "that you quite realize how terrible it may be for you." And as Inglethorpe did not appear to understand, he added, "Mr. Inglethorpe, you are standing in very grave danger." The two detectives fidgeted. I saw the official caution. Anything you say will be used in evidence against you. Actually hovering on Summerhayes' lips, Poirot went on. "Do you understand now, monsieur?" "No. What do you mean?" "I mean," said Poirot deliberately, "that you are suspected of poisoning your wife." A little gasp ran round the circle at this plain speaking. "Good heavens!" cried Inglethorpe, starting up. "What a monstrous idea! I poison my dearest Emily?" "I do not think," Poirot watched him narrowly, "that you quite realize the unfavourable nature of your evidence at the inquest. Mr. Inglethorpe, knowing what I have now told you, do you still refuse to say where you were at 6 o'clock on Monday afternoon?" With a groan, Alfred Inglethorpe sank down again and buried his face in his hands. Poirot approached and stood over him. "Speak," he cried menacingly. With an effort, Inglethorpe raised his face from his hands. Then slowly and deliberately, he shook his head. "You will not speak?" "No. I do not believe that anyone could be so monstrous as to accuse me of what you say." Poirot nodded thoughtfully, like a man whose mind is made up. "Soit," he said. "Then I must speak for you." Alfred Inglethorpe sprang up again. You! How can you speak? You do not know. He broke off abruptly. Poirot turned to face us. Mesdames and messieurs, I speak. Listen. I, Hercule Poirot, affirm that the man who entered the chemist's shop and purchased Stingerin at 6 o'clock on Monday last was not Mr. Inglethorpe. For at 6 o'clock on that day, Mr. Inglethorpe was escorting Mrs. Raikes back to her home from a neighbouring farm. I can produce no less than 5 witnesses to swear to having seen them together, either at 6 or just after. And as you may know, the Abbey Farm, Mrs. Raikes' home, is at least 2.5 miles distant from the village. There is absolutely no question as to the alibi. There was a moment's stupefied silence. Japp, who was the least surprised of any of us, was the first to speak. My word, he cried. You're the goods. And no mistake, Mr. Poirot. These witnesses of yours are all right, I suppose. Voila. I had prepared a list of them, names and addresses. You must see them, of course, but you will find it all right. I'm sure of that. Japp lowered his voice. I'm much obliged to you. A pretty mare's nest arresting him would have been. He turned to Inglethorpe. But if you'll excuse me, sir, why couldn't you say all this at the inquest? I will tell you why, interrupted Poirot. There was a certain rumour, a most malicious and utterly untrue one, interrupted Alfred Inglethorpe in an agitated voice. And Mr. Inglethorpe was anxious to have no scandal revived just at present. Am I right? Quite right, Inglethorpe nodded. With my poor Emily not yet buried, can you wonder I was anxious that no more lying rumours should be started? Between you and me, sir, remarked Japp, I'd sooner have any amount of rumours than be arrested for murder. And I venture to think your poor lady would have felt the same. And if it hadn't been for Monsieur Poirot here, arrested you would have been, as sure as eggs is eggs. I was foolish, no doubt, murmured Inglethorpe. But you do not know, Inspector, how I have been persecuted and maligned. And he shot a baleful glance at Evelyn Howard. Now, sir, said Japp, turning briskly to John, I should like to see the lady's bedroom, please, and after that I'll have a little chat with the servants. Don't you bother about anything. Mr. Poirot here will show me the way. As they all went out of the room, Poirot turned and made me a sign to follow him upstairs. There he caught me by the arm and drew me aside. Quick, go to the other wing. Stand there, just this side of the baize door. Do not move till I come. Then turning rapidly, he rejoined the 2 detectives. I followed his instructions, taking up my position by the baize door, and wondering what on earth lay behind the request. Why was I to stand in this particular spot and guard? I looked thoughtfully down the corridor in front of me. An idea struck me. With the exception of Cynthia Murdoch's, everyone's room was in this left wing. Had that anything to do with it? Was I to report who came or went? I stood faithfully at my post, The minutes passed. Nobody came. Nothing happened. It must have been quite 20 minutes before Poirot rejoined me. You have not stirred? No. I've stuck here like a rock. Nothing's happened. Ah. Was he pleased or disappointed? You've seen nothing at all? No. But you have probably heard something. A big bump, eh, mon ami? No. Is it possible? Ah. But I am vexed with myself. I am not usually clumsy. I made but a slight gesture. I know Poirot's gestures with the left hand and overwent the table by the bed. He looked so childishly vexed and crestfallen that I hastened to console him. Never mind, old chap. What does it matter? Your triumph downstairs excited you. I can tell you that was a surprise to us all. There must be more in this affair of Inglethorpe's with Mrs. Raikes than we thought, to make him hold his tongue so persistently. What are you going to do now? Where are the Scotland Yard fellows? Gone down to interview the servants. I show them all our exhibits. I'm disappointed in Jap. He has no method. Hello, I said, looking out of the window. Here's Dr. Bornstein. I believe you're right about that man Poirot. I don't like him. He is clever, observed Poirot meditatively. Oh, clever as the devil, I must say. I was overjoyed to see him in the plight he was in on Tuesday. You never saw such a spectacle. And I described the doctor's adventure. He looked a regular scarecrow, plastered with mud from head to foot. You saw him then? Yes, of course. He didn't want to come in. It was just after dinner, but Mr. Inglethorpe insisted. What? Poirot caught me violently by the shoulders. Was Dr. Bornstein here on Tuesday evening? Here? And you never told me? Why did you not tell me? Why? Why? He appeared to be in an absolute frenzy. Oh, my dear Poirot, I expostulated. I never thought it would interest you. I didn't know it was of any importance. Importance? It is of the first importance. So Dr. Bornstein was here on Tuesday night, the night of the murder. Hastings, do you not see? That alters everything, everything. I had never seen him so upset. Loosening his hold of me, he mechanically straightened a pair of candlesticks, still murmuring to himself, yes, that alters everything, everything. Suddenly he seemed to come to a decision. Allons, he said. We must act at once. Where is Mr. Cavendish? John was in the smoking room. Poirot went straight to him. Mr. Cavendish, I have some important business in Tadminster. A new clue. May I take your motor? Why, of course. Do you mean at once? If you please. John rang the bell and ordered round the car. In another 10 minutes we were racing down the park and along the high road to Tadminster. Now, Poirot, I remarked resignedly, perhaps you will tell me what all this is about. Well, mon ami, a good deal you can guess for yourself. Of course, you realize that now Mr. Inglethorpe is out of it. The whole position is greatly changed. We are face to face with an entirely new problem. We know now that there is one person who did not buy the poison. We have cleared away the manufactured clues. Now for the real ones. I have ascertained that anyone in the household, with the exception of Mrs. Cavendish, who was playing tennis with you, could have personated Mr. Inglethorpe on Monday evening. In the same way, we have his statement that he put the coffee down in the hall. No one took much notice of that at the inquest. But now it has a very different significance. We must find out who did take that coffee to Mrs. Inglethorpe eventually, or who passed through the hall whilst it was standing there. From your account, there are only two people whom we can positively say did not go near the coffee. Mrs. Cavendish and Mademoiselle Cynthia. Yes, that is so. I felt an inexpressibly lightening of the heart. Mary Cavendish could certainly not rest under suspicion. In clearing Alfred Inglethorpe, continued Poirot, I have been obliged to show my hand sooner than I intended. As long as I might be thought to be pursuing him, the criminal would be off his guard. Now, he will be doubly careful. Yes, doubly careful. You turned to me abruptly. Tell me, Hastings, you yourself, have you no suspicions of anybody? I hesitated. To tell the truth, an idea, wild and extravagant in itself, had once or twice that morning flashed through my brain. I had rejected it as absurd. Nevertheless, it persisted. You couldn't call it a suspicion, I murmured. It's so utterly foolish. Come now, urged Poirot encouragingly. Do not fear. Speak your mind. You should always pay attention to your instincts. Well then, I blurted out, it's absurd, but I suspect Miss Howard of not telling all she knows. Miss Howard? Yes. You laugh at me. Not at all. Why should I? I can't help feeling, I continued blunderingly, that we've rather left her out of the possible suspects, simply on the strength of her having been away from the place. But after all, she was only 15 miles away. A car would do it in half an hour. Can we say positively that she was away from Styles on the night of the murder? Yes, my friend, said Poirot unexpectedly. We can. One of my first actions was to ring up the hospital where she was working. Well, I learnt that Miss Howard had been on afternoon duty on Tuesday, and that a convoy coming in unexpectedly, she had kindly offered to remain on night duty, which offer was gratefully accepted. That disposes of that. Oh, I said, rather nonplussed. Really, I continued, it's her extraordinary vehemence against Inglethorpe that started me off suspecting her. I can't help feeling she'd do anything against him. And I had an idea she might know something about the destroying of the will. She might have burnt the new one, mistaking it for the earlier one in his favour. She's so terribly bitter against him. You consider her vehemence unnatural? Yes, she's so very violent. I wondered really whether she is quite sane on that point. Poirot shook his head energetically. No. You are on a wrong track there. There is nothing weak-minded or degenerate about Miss Howard. She's an excellent specimen of well-balanced English beef and brawn. She's sanity itself. Yet her hatred of Inglethorpe seems almost a mania. My idea was, very ridiculous one, no doubt, but that she had intended to poison him, and that in some way Mrs. Inglethorpe got hold of it by mistake. Well, I don't at all see how it could have been done. The whole thing's absurd and ridiculous to the last degree. Still, you are right in one thing. It is always wise to suspect everybody until you can prove logically and to your own satisfaction that they are innocent. Now, what reasons are there against Miss Howard's having deliberately poisoned Mrs. Inglethorpe? Oh, why, she was devoted to her, I exclaimed. Tush, tush, cried Poirot irritably. You argue like a child. If Miss Howard were capable of poisoning the old lady, she would be quite easily or equally capable of stimulating devotion. No, we must look elsewhere. You are perfectly correct in your assumption that a vehemence against Alfred Inglethorpe is too violent to be natural, but you are quite wrong in the deduction you draw from it. I have drawn my own deductions, which I believe to be correct, but I will not speak of them at present. He paused a minute, then went on. Now, to my way of thinking, there is one insuperable objection to Miss Howard's being the murderess, and that is that in no possible way could Mrs. Inglethorpe's death benefit Miss Howard. Now, there is no murder without a motive. I reflected. Could not Mrs. Inglethorpe have made a will in her favour? Poirot shook his head. But you yourself suggested that possibility to Mr. Wells. Poirot smiled. That was for a reason. I did not want to mention the name of the person who was actually in my mind. Miss Howard occupied very much the same position, so I used her name instead. Still, Mrs. Inglethorpe might have done so. Why that will, made on the afternoon of her death, may. But Poirot's shake of the head was so energetic that I stopped. No, my friend, I have certain little ideas of my own about that will. But I can tell you this much. It was not in Miss Howard's favour. I accepted his assurance, though I did not really see how he could be so positive about the matter. Well, I said with a sigh, we will acquit Miss Howard then. It is partly your fault that I ever came to suspect her. It was what you said about her evidence at the inquest that set me off. Poirot looked puzzled. What did I say about her evidence at the inquest? Don't you remember? When I cited her and John Cavendish as being above suspicion. Oh, yes, yes. He seemed a little confused, but recovered himself. By the way, Hastings, there is something I want you to do for me. Certainly, what is it? Next time you happen to be alone with Lawrence Cavendish, I want you to say this to him. I have a message for you from Poirot. He says, find the extra coffee cup and you can rest in peace. Nothing more, nothing less. Find the extra coffee cup and you can rest in peace. Is that right? I asked, much mystified. Excellent, excellent. But what does it mean? Ah, that I will leave you to find out. You have access to the facts. Just say that to him and see what he says. Very well, but it's all extremely mysterious. We were running into Tadministers now, and Poirot directed the car to the analytical chemist. Poirot hopped down briskly and went inside. In a few minutes he was back again. "There," he said. "That is all my business." "What were you doing there?" I asked in lively curiosity. I left something to be analysed." "Yes, but what?" "The sample of cocoa I took from the saucepan in the bedroom." "But that has already been tested," I cried, stupefied. "Dr. Bornstein had it tested. And you yourself laughed at the possibility of there being strychnine in it." "I know Dr. Bornstein had it tested," replied Poirot quietly. "Well then?" "Well, I have a fancy for having it analysed again, that is all." And not another word on the subject could I drag out of him. Join me for the next video. Join me for the next video of Affair at Styles. Join me, look out for the next video of Affair at Styles. I'll see you then. Bye-bye. Bye.